We now take you to the broadcast of It's Time with Rev Nathaniel W Martin. Here's Reverend Martin.
Dr. Blackwell, I want to say good morning, good afternoon, good evening, but certainly never good night and never ever goodbye. I heard the goodbyes from childhood. My name is Rev Nathaniel W Martin, and I'm the pastor of the New Life Institutional Baptist Church here in the city of Los Angeles, California. We're located at 8916 South Main Street, and we're welcome and been welcomed in, rather, to share the building with the Shiloh Missionary Christian Church, and the pastor is my good friend, the Reverend Dr. Della F. Hollerness, and we will be honoring her on the 28th of this month at the Vanguard Awards here in Los Angeles as Woman of Faith. I invite you to come and share with us. It will be held at the Homer United Methodist Church here in L.A., and the address off the top of my head is 3320 West Adams Boulevard. If I don't have that quite right, great big old white complex of buildings is hard to miss up there on Adams. It's west of Arlington. More information on that next week when I make sure I have that address nailed down pat. Notwithstanding, our current offering that you're viewing right now is entitled It's Time, and it is time for justice, and that justice must always involve environmental justice, because the poor have always been injured by the environment, the situation, the circumstances in which they were forced or have been forced, and especially the black rural and now the black urban poor have been funneled into projects and ghettos all across this great nation, deliberately, yes, intentionally, yes, by de jure, by law, by practice, and the effects of those policies are yet having repercussions with us at this very hour. And we need not only to deal with the environmental degradation of our planet and of our cities, our counties, and of our state, but we also need to deal with the economic picture, because this is a capitalistic system, and this economy was built on the backs and the blood and the sweat, the tears and the sorrow and the crying and the humiliation and the exploitation and the subjugation of the black people who were forced over here in the bowels of rank, dank, claustrophobic slave ships, slave vessels, and we are the descendants of the slaves. And we are by we, I mean the American descendants of slaves, and I don't mean to include or to dismiss the sufferings of the fights in the Caribbean, in the Bahamas, in Jamaica, or in any of the periphery of islands, but I am specifically referencing and upholding my people who have suffered here in these here United States of America. No, we're not from Kenya. We're born right here in Mississippi, Texas, Alabama, Georgia, all of the southern states and all across the nation. And we are the ones who were prompted by just the continuous pounding and grinding of our persons into the ground of this society to rise up and say enough is enough and no more. And we fought, and we were able to get some civil rights relief As Malcolm X said, we needed human rights relief, but we were able to get some human rights relief. But it seems as fast as we were able to get them, then the other peripheral countries started sending their people in here to soak up all of our hard-won, hard-fought victories, so that we wound up again being pushed to the back of the line by people from other countries who were not fighting for the freedoms in their countries that we had fought for here. But they were, like the old adage said, they showed up at the table on banqueting night and they didn't bring nothing but their appetite. And so we need to rethink or readdress this business of labeling or aggregating all black people, especially those of us that are born in America, that have borne the burden and the heat of the day, labeling us all as people of color, because people of color did not fight for where we are now. People of color showed up after the fight and wanted to take the lion's share. One of my Bible scriptures that I'm going to deal with today is, of course, my familiar revelation scripture, Deuteronomy chapter 15, picking up the reading, the quotation, recitation at verse 12. Those of you that have Bibles, it says, "And if thy brother, an Hebrew man or an Hebrew woman, be sold unto thee and serve thee 6 years, then in the 7th year thou shalt let them go out free from thee. And when thou sendest him or her out free from thee, thou shalt not let them go away empty, but thou shalt furnish them," mark this word, "liberally out of thy flock and out of thy floor and out of thy winepress. Of that with the Lord thy God hath blessed thee, thou shalt bless them." So then a person coming out of slavery under God's ethos, under God's direction, would never be sent away empty-handed, broke, busted, root hog, or die poor, which was the case here in the 13 colonies and in the Union and in the United States of America. You were not to be, God had too much love for even the stranger to send them out empty-handed. They would go out, amen, with something from the flock, something from the floor, and something from the wine press. Not just the wine press, but the flock and the floor. So that the person had supplies, had wherewithal to get a fresh start in the race of life. Lyndon Baines Johnson, in his monumental Howard University speech, "We Shall Overcome," speech, said that you do not take a person who has been hobbled for years, bring them up to the starting line for the race of life, take off the shackles and say, now you're free to run with everybody else, and think that you have done your duty, because that is not equity. Because the person who's just coming out of slavery or just coming out of captivity or imprisonment is ill-equipped to run the race of life with those who have not had to deal with those types of impediments in their life. Consequently, American slavery, chattel slavery, was unscriptural and unbiblical for many reasons. Not only those which we have reiterated, but as you look in the scriptural definition of slavery, you never lost your identity, you never lost your culture, you never lost your customs, you never lost your tradition, you never lost your dignity, and you never lost your self-respect. But in chattel slavery, all of those things were stripped from our people. And we are now reaping and still reaping the consequences and the results of those policies and practices that were started way back then. And yes, they have stopped, but the consequences, the effect are still with us at this very moment. Psychologically, as Dr. Georgie Grew has pointed out, we suffer with multi-generational trauma. That means our generation is still dealing with trauma from former generation. Then you have the school of epigenetics, and that epigenetics is an attempt to recognize the strange phenomena that occurs when a trauma occurs to somebody else, and although you were not there, you were in the proximity that even if you heard the report, you were traumatized. And as I said on last week, we never received any counseling for slavery. We never received any counseling for Jim Crow or redlining or any of that stuff. We were just told to pick it up and get on, as though we were never in those straits. And even Dr. Martin Luther King gave no credence to the pain that people had suffered. He said you must run because either you must run the race, run faster than the man in front, or forever remain behind. I mean, he made no allowance for us receiving any type of counseling for the legacy and the history and the reality of the slave ship and the slave master's whip and the slavery itself. And then following that, as we said, the 100 years of Jim Crow. Here in this country, we have celebrated from 1619 up to 2019, 400 years from the slave ships up until now. And we are still laboring under many of the misfortunes that befell our people, and a lot of the social consequences that were codified in laws, which, though those laws were found to be unconstitutional, the consequences and the effects of those laws are still being felt at this very present hour, just like the benefits that accrued to the slave holder, the slave owner, the slave trader, and their descendants. They still have the consequences and the effect of those benefits, in that they have 400 years of wealth accumulation, 250 years under direct legalized slavery, and another 100 years of legalized discrimination. And here we are in year 400, still attempting to get the nation to recognize the need for remunerative and remedial reparations that would begin to redress those harsh realities. Here in LA County, we just finished a great election, and one of the measures on that election ballot was a Measure FD, which I voted against it, and I'll give my reasons now why I voted against it. I said nothing before because I would not influence anybody else. The reason I voted against Measure FD, because Measure FD was to provide relief for wildfires and to provide super scoopers for wildfire. And I don't know if any of you know anything about wildfire, but you don't have wildfire down here in Inglewood. You don't have wildfire here in LA proper. You have wildfires out there in the wildfire-prone areas. And there was what you called at one time, it still occurs, but to a lesser degree, because now you have the reverse of white flight. Now you have gentrification, where you have our white brothers and sisters who originally moved way out there in those wildfire-prone areas. They remind you they moved out there to get away from black people. They moved out there to get away from me, because when I moved into Inglewood, it was a majority white city, and then all the white folk just flew, just disappeared. And they moved out there in those areas that they wanted us to add $100 to a year to our parcels so they could get some additional firefighting equipment to put down the fires in the fire-prone areas that they voluntarily moved into, and in many cases defiantly moved into. Say, we want to get away from you Negroes. We want to get out there with the bears, and we want to get out there with the mountain lions, and we want to get out there where the deer and the antelope play, all of that type of thing. And they intentionally, deliberately, knowingly built their houses in those fire-prone areas. And therefore, when the fire seasons come, those areas suffer a lot of uncontrollable blazes. And they suck up a great deal of emergency resources from all over the nation. People have to rush in firefighting equipment. And what they wanted to do was to get some additional firefighting equipment from L.A. County or from the state of California, and that would allow them to have super scoopers. Now, don't no super scoopers come down in Inglewood to put out no fire. You don't have the prisoners, volunteers, firefighters from the prison coming down to Inglewood or Los Angeles to put out no fire. You don't have that kind of fires down here. You have those fires out there where the rich people have built their homes in order to get away from people like myself. So I feel that if your house is prone to fire because you have built it in a fire-prone area, then you should be willing to have that additional assessment placed upon your property and your neighbor's property and all of the surrounding who are out there, that it should be all who bear the burden of putting them fires out, because you are the ones who get the benefit of living in the areas with the bears and the mountain lions and the antelope and the deer and all of that call of nature like that. So it was not going to benefit me down here, because when I call the fire department, I got to tell them my address and where I live, and then give them direction, because they can't find me. God have mercy. But, so I was not unsympathetic to their plight, but I did not see where we had a obligation to accept another $100 a year annual assessment upon our already high property taxes in order to foot their comfort and their living conditions. So I voted against Measure FD, and I have just explained to you, and the roots of that go all the way back to when the redlining occurred, and when the first families were allowed to purchase the homes in Allentown and Rollingwood and all the other iterations of Levittown that sprang up all across the nation. It was an exclusive area, and what made it exclusive? It was exclusively white. And so now that we've had to fight the civil rights battles and all of that, and in order to get back up to where we are, God knows we haven't got very far, but still in all, we are not where we ought to be. And all of that is rooted in the discriminatory policies of the real estate industry, real estate agents, real estate brokers, the real estate salespeople, the banks, the bankers, the brokerage bankers and the like, the mortgage holders, the origination fee charged against our people, not against anybody else. We had to pay an origination fee because they didn't want to sell us the house in the first place. And so they made it as odious and an expensive a proposition as possible. And so whenever I see that they're trying to get us to put some more money up for them to continue living the life of Riley with Bambi and all of that ilk, no. I said, no, we can't get no help with our schools. We can't get no help with our hospitals. But yet you want us to help put the fire out in the area that you moved in, and you knew that was a fire-prone area. And so that was one of the measures that was on the ballot here in Los Angeles, and it went down to defeat. The Bible gives the story of a man who was at the pool of Bethesda. Bet. It means house, Esda, porches. And this man had been in this condition, this affliction, for 38 long years. But one day Jesus came and began to question the man. First question was, wilt thou be made whole? But the underlying situation was that Jesus knew, when Jesus knew that this man had been in this condition, in this circumstance, in this environment, in this situation for that long a time, 38 years. That's 2 years short of 40, 2 years short of 4 decades. A decade is 10 years. That man had been in that condition. He had been in that condition so long that when Jesus got there to ask him, wilt thou be made whole? He told Jesus, I don't have anybody to help me to get to the water. But while I am coming, somebody else steps down before me. And when you look at that story, you cannot help but see humanity. All humanity is represented in that story. Whether you're rich or whether you're poor, whether you're upper middle class or whatever class that you claim to you be the class in, upper middle class, lower middle class, and poor. You are represented around the Bethesda pool. You're represented around the Bethesda pool. The rich are represented and the poor are represented because they all are trying to get the benefit of the resources that were there at the pool. And I mentioned it in relation to black people because it appears that just as soon as the news got out that the black people had finally fought their way to the table and that there was some benefit. And here come everybody from everywhere else, the Caribbean, Jamaica, the Bahamas, the Virgin Islands, Belize, don't leave out all of Mexico, Central America, Guatemala, Nicaragua, and all of those places come flooding in here to do what? Take advantage of the advantages, the benefits that the Black freedom struggle had just begun to enjoy. Thank you, Doc. Last 5 minutes of my tirade. And so it brings us to a consideration of affirmative action, and it brings us to a consideration of how it is that even here in 2020, that black people have still not attained the promised land that looked like we were so close to getting it. But of course, every time we make an action that is positive, and our actions have always benefited everybody, then there is an opposite reaction on the part of the reactionaries. Yes, we have some white people that work with us, but we have even more larger white people that work against us, and they are the reactionary. They develop what you call the white backlash. And that means that as the black man is still laying at the pool of Bethesda, all of those blessings around, he's in the place of blessing, but he can't get in there to get the blessing because somebody else is always getting in there before he gets a chance to get his foot, his toe in the waters of healing, the waters of blessing, the waters of benefit, the waters of advantage, the waters of uplift, the waters of improvement. No, we don't get a chance to get the full benefit of that water. When the angel troubles the water, everybody from Mexico gets in the water before we do. Everybody from Jamaica, Nicaragua, Guatemala, all of those places. And we're going to have to put a stop to it because we cannot take care of the whole world. Why, if we ever get universal health care, we don't get a chance to enjoy it. Why? Because all these people, all these other nations are going to do what? Flood in here and push us back, and they will, whatever meager benefit there may be in getting a universal health care package will be minimized because you don't have enough hospital services, you don't have enough hospital staff, and it appears that there is still a bias and a prejudice against the black people of this nation, not the black people from India, but the black people that were born in the United States of America. I ain't talking about naturalized. I'm talking about those that were legitimate, born here, born not in Kenya, and your mama is from Alabama. No, I'm from Texas, and my wife is from Texas, and our children is born and offspring, and you understand, and that is the problem. We are not really wanted at the table. They want our blues, they want our lips, they want our hips, they want everything that we have, but they do not want us. As I get ready to wrap up, I have not done very much, unfortunately. I did mean to deal with affirmative action, but as you can see how affirmative action has been watered down, and how we black people who have suffered here are not lumped in with the group that call people of color, we're going to have trouble. And as I wrap up, I want to say to you again, as I said to you before, if you're working on a job, you need to be starting your sideline because you can see the way things are going. Even with this coronavirus, you're supposed to be laid off for a great deal of time. You still got to make a living. You still got bills to pay. You still got house notes to pay, gas to buy, food to pay for. What am I saying? These folks don't want to pay you. They begrudge you making $1. You know what you need to do? You tell them to take this job and shove it. If they don't want to pay you, don't work for them. Thank you, Doc.
Nothing spins over. All of my good days, all of my good days outweigh my bad days. Yes, they do. Outweigh my bad days. I just say thank you, Lord. Thank you, Lord. I won't complain. Complain.